Hi, it's Rob Bowron with Sharp College Football, and welcome back. We're 2 nights in a row, and we're back at the Pac-12. I'm really excited to preview this team today, a team that's been really the most consistent team in the Pac-12 over the past couple seasons, the Utah Utes. As the other powers within the Pac-12 have struggled to put together complete teams on the field, Utah has been reliably consistent. Rarely great, often very good, but just about the only team in the conference that's been able to put together a pretty good offense, a pretty good defense, and pretty good special teams all in the same year. Not something you've seen from many Pac-12 teams in the last 5 years. So I'm excited to preview the Utes today. This is your first time tuning in. This is a preview series where we're going through the projections from Bowron, an advanced stats system for college football. This is an advanced stats focused preview. If you are looking to get an in-depth view of the depth chart, you should go find your local beat writer. That person exists, and they can help you find that. I'm not here for that. I'm here to run through what the Utes were good at on the field, what they were good at, and what they were not good at on the field. Talk about their likely chances of improving that, run through their schedule and their chances of getting through their schedule. Talk about pitfalls. You don't have any changes on, an offensive coordinator or defensive coordinator, so nothing really to talk about there. They have 2 of the better ones in the country, and Andy Ludwig and Morgan Scalley. Really just Utah has been a really kind of fun, exciting team, and I think that in a lot of ways, Ludwig is one of the more underappreciated offensive coordinators in college football, and we'll certainly talk about that. But keeping him this year was a major coup for Utah because some places came according. Kyle Whittingham, of course, is one of the most reliable coaches in college football. And Utah, I think it's also probably worth pointing out, Utah has really done some tremendous roster management coming out of post-COVID, being able to take advantage of the additional COVID year. They consistently over the last couple seasons have had a lot of returning production. That's a remarkable job by this coaching staff. It does hurt their overall development ranking and we'll get into why. But the Utes have done a terrific job in roster management. But I'm interested to see where the Utes finish out this season in the Pac-12. There is the potential, of course, that one of the other teams that you might talk about in the Pac-12 title conversation, Washington, USC, Oregon State, the Beavers had defense but no offense last season, or Oregon is able to put it together and put a complete team on the field, and then it'll get more interesting for the Utes, I think. But I think there is room for the Utes to improve off of where they were last year, maybe even be as good as they were in 21 when they were a better team. So let's go ahead and hop in and start running through it. Of course, the head coach is Kyle Whittingham. I think one of the most respected coaches in all of college football, has really done a tremendous job with Utah, building this program as they transition from the Mountain West to the Pac-12. That was quite a while ago, but done a tremendous job with that transition. They finished at number 10 in 22, so we have them projected right where they were last year. But they were number 5 overall in 21. And if you're a Utah fan, you're sort of hoping you get more of a team like they were in 21. Even they were a really good team last season. But I think if you're a Utah fan, you'd certainly like to, they were better in 21. They're at number 53 in coaching and development. And a lot of people may be saying, how is that possible? There's 2 factors here. One of which is that Utah itself has been pretty good, right? So you get less of a benefit because you're often returning, you have players that are, and you have established sort of a track record of being pretty good overall. They've been returning a lot of production. You're going to get more credit in coaching and development if you don't have a lot of returning production and you still manage to put a really good product on the field. If you do that, you should get more credit than people who return a lot of production and put a good product on the field. And Utah's recruiting has been slightly ticking up. Not just slightly, they've been improving significantly in recruiting over some of the recruiting classes of the past. Their 2-year rolling recruiting ranking is at number 26 overall. I think you could argue, and I don't follow recruiting all that closely at this point in the year because you shouldn't. But Utah's been on a bit of a roll recruiting over the summer. They're at number 14 again this year, and Bill Connolly's returning production. That's a good sign for the Utes coming into this season. They return a lot, particularly on offense. Something that's been, I think, one of their calling cards, of late is they've done a really good job managing returning production. 39 overall in special teams last season. That's certainly something they could improve on. Traditionally, the Utahs put together better special teams than they've had of late. They definitely, and I say this every time, special teams is more about place kicking than anything else. Utah just needs to, make more field goals if they want to improve that. Let's go ahead and hop in. I'm going to run through all the stats you're going to see are controlling for at least opponent tempo and field position. Sometimes they're going to be controlling for more. I'll tell you what else they're controlling for. Do not, under any circumstances, comment in this about like some points per game take. Points per game is for children. At least control for tempo, at least make a little bit of effort and go for like points per drive or something like that. But college football is so tremendously heterogeneous. That means college football is incredibly varied in team quality versus, say, the NFL, which is very homogeneous. Like the player quality in the NFL is very, very similar across teams. College football is not like that. There's a big difference amongst the teams. So you got to control for opponent if you want to be able to say anything about how a team's performing. I know you, as a fan, watched all of your team's games last season. And therefore, I think you know exactly where the team's going to fall in an overall ordinal rank within every NCAA team whose games you absolutely did not watch last season. So one of the handy things about this is it helps you place what you see on tape into the context of how the performance goes, overall. Right. So, yes, I think a lot of folks within the Pac-12 last season, like the Pac-12 had very few, good defenses last season. Really only Oregon State was a really good defense last year. So, like if you're measuring Pac-12 offensive performance and you're not controlling for that, you can run into a little bit of trouble. Anywho, that stuff's important. Like, I don't care about counting stats. I'm here to talk about advanced stats. There are some advanced-ish stats we'll talk about in this preview. I'll call those out and why I think they're interesting, why they're worth using still, and also maybe point out, why I think they're advanced-ish rather than sort of like fully controlling for everything you need to know as we run through. But I'll run through both units, the schedule, and then we'll wrap it up. I'm pretty excited about this Utah preview. Utah's always a team that I follow pretty closely. Let's go ahead and hop in. So Utah finished at number 12 on offense last season. That's pretty darn good, I think, considering there's Andy Ludwig, their offensive coordinator. It's pretty darn good considering the impossible amount of, look, everybody has injuries. And Utah fans, you're going to get annoyed later on when I point out, of course, that Caleb Williams, the Heisman Trophy winner, was injured. But like Utah had a bevy of injuries on the offensive side of the football. Cam Rising was hobbling around a little bit. God knows that poor man had almost no one to throw to. And they really had to rely almost entirely on the running game, and they were able to do it, which wasn't something you could necessarily say about Utah every season. And although under Ludwig, I think you could really argue they've done a good job really improving their run scheme and blocking. So Utah finished at number 12 overall on offense. You can see Georgia is 1. They were the best offense in college football last season. Utah's a pretty significant step back from where Georgia sat at number 1 overall. Roughly say 70% of as effective as Georgia was offensively. Pretty big fallback. I think Utah's got some real room to grow here offensively with better health this season. I'd be surprised if they had the same kind of injury bug they had last year. Anyway, they were number 6 overall in 21. I think that's a sign that like when they're more healthy, they can be more potent. Certainly Ludwig needs some more weapons, and Rising needs some healthy weapons to be able to take advantage of. They were finished at number 27 overall in drive efficiency last season. They struggled a little bit here. This is sort of a middle. This number is closer to the middle of the Power 5. Certainly a number they'd like, I think, to improve this season is being able to put together longer drives to be able to put up points. They were number 18 overall in explosive drives. Again, this is a number I think they like to improve overall. As you go through here, there's nothing that jumps out of you as like particularly bad or particularly great. great. But I think these are numbers that if, they're going to get back up to that number, 6 overall ranking that they had in 21, you're going to have to improve in drive efficiency and improve in explosive drives, both being able to sustain drives and put up big plays. Play efficiency is the least important of the core 4 beta rank metrics, number 19 overall here. This is your yards per play outside of explosives. And of course, also controlling for opponent field position tempo. Decent job here overall, not necessarily one they have to improve on massively. Negative drives, number 10 overall. This is probably their best number. Negative drives is important. This is avoiding 3 and outs, avoiding turnovers. Utah did a really good job here of not letting the defense do bad things to them. I think this is remarkable considering that you're basically left, like Cam Rising was basically left at points with like no one to throw to. Pretty decent run pass split here. And I think this is a reflection of the injuries the Utes had, particularly at tight end. Utah's had a bit of a wide receiver problem for a number of seasons. I say like, I'm interested to see if they get it fixed this season. I find it interesting to whether Utah could make a step forward with some wide receiver play, not be so heavily dependent on the tight ends. We say that as if like everyone knows the ball is going to the tight end, and yet the tight ends still Ludwig and the tight ends, Ludwig finds ways to either scheme them open or the tight ends find ways to get open, and Rising finds ways to get them the ball. It's coming. It's still going to bust you in the chops. So that's a remarkable accomplishment. But last season, I think with the injuries, they did fall back in their passing efficiency. I think they'd like to get that number back up again. It would be fascinating, of course, if Utah were able to develop some wide receivers that could play and incorporate them in their game, in their offensive game plan. But as it is now, I think Ludwig runs some really, really interesting stuff. One of the most innovative and underappreciated offensive coordinators in all of college football. Largely has a really good track record in places that he's been, including at Wisconsin and Vanderbilt. And at Utah, he's, and he stayed, the rumors, of course, that he was courted by Notre Dame to replace Tommy Rees. That would have been an upgrade over Rees if Notre Dame had been able to land him. Ludwig stayed in Salt Lake City. Major coup for the Utes to be able to keep him when somebody like Notre Dame comes a calling. Would have been really would have been an interesting, really good hire for the Irish too. But I would prefer to live in Salt Lake, other than on the inversion days, than in South Bend. Even on the inversion days, I would pick Salt Lake over South Bend. I've been, I think I'm going to South Bend this year for the Ohio State Notre Dame game. Anyway, that's a rambling aside. Cam Rising is your quarterback, of course, for the Utes. I think again, and I think Rising did an underappreciated job last season within an offense where he was largely left to fend for himself down the back stretch. 64.7% completion percentage, 7.9 per. That's remarkable considering often how ineffective Utah's wide receivers are. To get that much out of an offense that in some ways felt like it was held together by bailing wire and hopes and dreams is a real remarkable achievement for Rising. Utah's offensive line, was pretty good last season overall, 3.13 line yards. That's number 5 overall, according to Football Outsiders. Line yards is an advanced-ish stat that attempts to assign how much of a run, a team's rushing average you can assign to the offensive line. A 2.9% sack rate, and that's good for number 13 overall. That's really good. And sack rate is sacks are much more of a quarterback stat than they are an offensive line stat. Kudos to Rising. Some credit to the offensive line too, but kudos for Rising for being able to get the ball out and not take sacks. That really, when we talk about that negative drives number, avoiding sacks really freaking helps. They're number 5 in returning production on the offensive side of the ball coming back next season, 83% overall. You got to feel really good about this Utes offense opportunity to take a step forward. I'm excited to see if Ludwig can do anything with some of the transfers in as well as the guys they have returning. Like I said, I think he's one of the more underappreciated offensive minds in college football. Somebody that both advanced stats and people to watch tape really like, with what he does to get, to be able to generate yards and points, which is ultimately the name of the game. Let's flip over and talk about the defense. On the defensive side of the ball, the Utes were at 17 overall last season. Of course, Morgan Scalley's your defensive coordinator. Again, a really respected defensive coordinator within college football. They were at number 9 overall in 21, though, so a little bit of a step back from where they were the prior year. And I think they'd like to certainly improve on the number that they put up last season as well. Number 25 in effect in drive efficiency. This isn't a great. 17 overall. I like to remind people, last season you'd grade Power 5 teams on a 1 to 65 scale. There's a vast difference in resources between Power 5 and Group of 5 teams. So if, it's 25, 17 overall is like on the sunny side of, good, not very good. Their drive efficiency number is much more towards like a, sunny side of middle of the road, Power 5 defensive number. You could put together some drives to put up points against the Utes. Their explosive drive number wasn't great. Number 33 overall. They're going to have to improve here. They're going to have to do more to limit big plays than they did last year. Their play efficiency number, again, also not great. It is the least important of the core 4 beta rank metrics. The numbers that they really need to improve are drive efficiency, finding ways to get off the field without giving up points, explosive drives, containing big plays. They did a really good job and probably hung their hat, I think you could argue, on negative drives, forcing 3 and outs, forcing turnovers. They certainly had a little bit of a, rain and wind aided game, 5 fumble game that Arizona gave them in there. But this was where they sort of made their hay. They did find ways to sort of inflict pain on inflict negative drives and inflict bad things on the offense. They have a pretty big run pass split here. This has been developing. Utah's pass defense was okay the year before. They got worse this past season. Outside of Clark Phillips, you could throw on the Utes pretty well. They haven't had the same kind of pass rush that they've had. If you think about the days where they were regularly getting defensive linemen drafted, they haven't sent a defensive lineman really, or a pass rusher really up into the draft in a while. I think the Utes development pipeline needs to get going again on the defensive line for them to fix some of this. It's going to be interesting to see how well they do without Phillips and of course in place. But you could throw on the Utes for sure last season. And a lot of teams did. So this is the thing that if for them to improve this number, the run defense and the run fit, I think has been really good. Now that is a credit to the front 7. I just went off and said they really haven't had the guys that, end up getting drafted in the NFL as pass rushers. That's true, but they've done a really good job in their run fit that they've done, and that they should get a lot of credit for. But the pass defense has been leaky the last couple seasons. Now in beta rank, the offensive numbers are the offensive effective rush and the an effective pass are not calculated at the margin. I care about what a team wants to do because that's what you have to stop. For the defense, however, they don't possess choice. They don't get to choose whether the offense is going to run the ball or throw the ball. So you need to calculate it at the margin. So at the this is calculated at the play level, whereas for the offensive numbers, it is not. So at the play level, the Utes are just getting burned a bit. Defending the pass. I think they can largely improve here. They put up better effective pass numbers in the past. They definitely need some work. Again, it's been a little bit since we had a conversation about a Utah safety potentially getting drafted either. Somebody might come in and correct me on that, but I think the Utes are going to need to take a step forward on the pass defense next season for the defense to improve. Hopping over to the schedule, of course, the Utes do play 2 Power 5 opponents, but they also play an FCS team, so you can add 1 to this number here, and so we have them at about 9.5 wins overall. Now, they start out with a pretty tough game. Now, Florida's been good. With Billy Napier, I don't think you could argue that there's not some work to do for him there. Offensively, I like what Florida's, been able to do. I'm interested to see where they are with the new quarterback. Of course, that's what really torched the Utes last season. And that game was they struggled to contain Anthony Richardson. But, and I think Napier, if he has his druthers, is going to be, is going to look to run the football. That should largely, I think, benefit the Utes in this matchup. Of course, Utah had to go and play in the swamp last year, and there was all the talk about the humidity. Now, Florida gets to go play at a little altitude, and that'll be interesting for them. Although Utah's not at, Salt Lake City's not at Colorado Springs or Laramie altitude. I think we're gonna get a sense of how good, like I said, if the Utah's rush defense is as good as it was last year in this game. Are they able to contain the Florida quarterback if it turns out that he is a mobile quarterback? And then we're gonna get a sense again of what Utah's offense looks like, what they look like when they're a little more healthy. Are we gonna get more out of these wide receivers? Florida's got a new defensive coordinator in place. Napier needed to make a move, and I think we're going to get to see something from Utah here and get an idea of where they sit. Baylor's an interesting team. We expected them to take a bit of a step back last season, because they lost so much production off of the prior season, and also got a little bit lucky in that prior season too. Baylor, I think, this should be another pretty good test on the Utes. On the Utes offense. I don't expect Baylor to be a tremendous offense that the Utes are going to have to face, but it will be interesting because I think Baylor will look to throw the football around a little bit with Grimes as the offensive coordinator, maybe lean in a little bit more into the passing game. Grimes had, when he was the BYU offensive coordinator, did have a really solid passing game. He's probably had, and maybe looking in this season to incorporate more of that because he's been at Baylor long enough to have more of his guys in place. Should give us a little bit of an idea, at least, of where the Utes passing defense is. Then we get UCLA. Now, UCLA, I think you can argue that Chip Kelly runs one of the most innovative and interesting run schemes in all of college football. They sit at we have them projected at number 22 overall. This is a good matchup again, I think, for Utah. UCLA might not have might be starting quite a young quarterback, early on in the season. I expect UCLA to be able to run the football, but this is, like I said, this is going to be a matchup of strength on strength, at least for the UCLA or Utah defense here. Should be a really fun one to watch for that. I don't know that this game is going to be the one. Chip Kelly does not necessarily have the world's most interesting passing game to go with his run scheme. So I don't know that this is one that's going to necessarily test the Utes and give us a really good idea of where their pass defense is. But it should be a fun one. I think the Utah, now if you flip it around, the Utah offense should have a field day. Chip Kelly has not been able to find a defensive coordinator to really get things going. It's been the consistent bugaboo for the Bruins under Chip Kelly's tenure. It will be more than a little bit interesting, I think, to see the Utah have to go through and really have to deal with what should be UCLA, a pretty easy UCLA defense to have to face. Sorry, I got a work email. Okay. Apologies for that. Now I do think that and I'm also I went to go check. Oh my gosh, you got to be kidding me. All right, there we go. Apologies for this. I wanted to double check. Yeah, Bill McGovern's still there, shockingly. So yeah, Chip Kelly didn't make a move. He really should have made a move. So good luck, UCLA, on defense. So in comes Oregon State. Oregon State is projected to be a pretty good team next season. Look, and the UCLA game could be close. Utah's favored by 7 in the model there. They're going to need to, in this, it's a tight walk on these first couple of games. They're going to, need to avoid turnovers to end up, winning out in those first couple of games. And particularly like this Oregon State game. Oregon State had a really, really good defense, best defense in the Pac-12 last season. Now, offensively, they really were not as good as they could have been. And a lot of it had to do with the fact that Oregon State really lacked a functional quarterback. Of course, in steps DJU from Clemson. this might open up the Beavers, I think, are a fun dark horse candidate within the Pac-12. I expect the defense to be largely good again under Trent Bray. I think Jonathan Smith and Brian Lindgren are really good offensively. They could be a really fun team. This could be a really tight matchup. This could be and this might be one of those under the radar, sneaky fun games to keep an eye out for towards the end of September. This is going to tell us a lot, I think, about where Utah's defense is. I do expect, like, Oregon State loves to run the football. They have the best offensive line coach in the Pac-12 and Jim Michalczek. It'll be fun to get to see them against this Utah defense if they are able to establish the run at all, or if they're able to use the pass to open things up. I think you flip it to the other side. This Oregon State defense was really, really good last year. I don't know if they're going to be quite as good, but I don't expect them to be very bad as long as Bray is there. And I think this Oregon State team, this is going to tell us a lot about where this Utah team is going to be, because this will be probably the best defense they'll face in the early period is this Beavers defense. Then they get a Cal team that's really struggling. I like the Spadoval hire at Cal. I think that's probably the best offensive coordinator move Wilcox has made in his tenure. But all of his other moves haven't worked up to this point, so it's hard to place a ton of faith into it. The defense that he really turned around in his first couple seasons there has kind of come back to earth a little bit. I don't expect Cal to be a mass, I expect that they can beat this projection that we have them for at 72. I'm not sure by how much. This might be 14 points, but I still expect Utah to be favored pretty heavily by the time that this game rolls around. Now comes USC. Of course, like, Utah benefited in the Pac-12 championship from Caleb Williams' injury. But this should be, this is going to be a really, really fun game. USC, is going to be able to throw the football around. Utah, that has not in the past 2 seasons been their strength. Of course, the bugaboo for USC is they've just had an awful defense last season, and really the year before. If USC's defense can improve, that's a major watch out coming in, because I think they're going to be, like, Lincoln Riley's going to be able to put up better offensive numbers than Utah likely is. It is going to come down to, how much Alex Grinch, if he can, improve this defense overall. This game is going to be on the road at USC. Should be a really fun, tight matchup. In this game, we're going to know a lot about the Utes pass defense. And really too, USC needs the offensive line to improve as well, so that it's not just Caleb Williams and some pretty good wide receivers going out there and putting up numbers. That'll be an interesting one to see. Oregon's got a new offensive coordinator in place, and they're going to visit Utah this time. I think this game should be a fun, so we talked about, there's a bunch of games on the schedule that are going to be a fun one for the Utes. Of course, Washington's going to roll on this season as well. But Oregon's got a new offensive coordinator. I like the hire. The defense wasn't great, last season under Lanning. They're going to have to improve defensively, I think. It'll be interesting to see, I think, if they're going to, I like the offensive coordinator hire, if they're going to be able to keep up the kind of numbers they were putting up under Dillingham or not. But, as we go through here, Oregon State, USC, Oregon, Utah's not missing anybody that we would call, a real Pac-12 contender, along with Washington on the schedule. They're going to have to, like the Huskies, they're going to have to play them all this season, which I think makes for a fun season where you are going to get some really, the Pac-12 is not going to have likely too many misses that are going to really affect the, how the, conference standings play out. But this Oregon game, Utah is a favorite in this game. Oregon's got less returning production than Utah does, coming into the season. It will be interesting to see, of course, how well Oregon does. I think that they can beat this projection overall at 25. That's going to put this game pretty close. And if you, like I said, if you go through this Utah schedule, they're certainly favored in a lot of these games, but some of these games are pretty tight. Then they get the Sun Devils. Of course, Kenny Dillingham is taking over at Arizona State. I expect that they can improve maybe off of where we have them projected at 93, but I don't expect it to be a massive improvement overall. like Utah should absolutely roll in this game. Don't turn the ball over a bunch of times and you should be fine. They get to go to Washington. Washington really threw the ball around last season and Utah didn't play them. This is going to, this game and somewhat the next game are going to be real tests for Utah's secondary to see if they can improve off of where they were last year. Washington is, of course, with Michael Penix and that awesome offense that DeBoer and Grubb run. They're going to really test the Utes, going to, look to put up a lot of points on them. It is, Washington was the number 1 overall team in effective pass last season. This will be a real test for this Utah defense. But the flip side of it is Washington's defense really struggled last season. Utah should be able to put up some points in this game. Some of these these games might be close and fun, but for the teams like that we talk about here with Oregon State, Utah has been much more steady. They are a much more complete team on offense and defense. All of these other teams that we've listed and have to run through, there is one unit that lags behind that really has to improve. And there's one other unit that's really good. For most of these teams, USC, Oregon, Washington, it's the offense. For Oregon State, it's the defense. It's the defense that's ahead and the offense has to take the step forward. Arizona's a funny one. Last season, of course, like Arizona in decent weather would have likely been able to put up more of a fight against the Utes, but 5 fumbles and a downpour will do that to you. I do expect Arizona is going to be able to throw the ball pretty well again this season. Utah should be significantly favored in this game, maybe as much as 14 points, but it could be down as much as 10. Arizona, it's going to depend on the defense taking a step forward. Their defense is awful last year. I don't expect that to improve a ton with Johnny Manson as your defensive coordinator. He's just not very good at the job. But in the second year, he might show some improvement. They definitely need that. I think the offense can improve off of where they were last year. The defense just has to improve off of one of the worst defenses in the Power 5 last season. Even some improvement maybe gets them to a bad Power 5 defense. Utah's going to be able to put up some points in this game. They should win this game, but it doesn't play to what we've seen the last 2 seasons is their defensive strengths. Like Utah wants you to try to run the football. They're not going to match up well with teams that throw the ball a lot. Colorado, man, mileage may vary. I expect them to beat this projection we have at 98. By how much is a big open question. Utah should handle Colorado. Again, don't turn the ball over 3 or 4 times and you should be absolutely fine in this game. This is a tough schedule for the Utes, right? 2 Power 5 teams, both of whom are in the top 40, one of which is in the top 15 on the schedule in non-conference. And then there are no real misses. You don't get Stanford, which is really down in the what used to be the Pac-12 North, and they're still using the rotating schedules that they had off of that. And you don't get Washington State, which was a bit down as well. And instead you get, Washington and Oregon State, from the North. That's tough to finish out. So there's, like I said, they're not going to have any misses in the Pac-12. They're going to play all the tough teams that we have projected coming into the season. I think Utah's going to have their work cut out for them. But the bright side is if you're a Utes fan, is like what we just talked about with Washington yesterday. Washington's got the same predicament, right? Like they're not missing anyone either. Washington doesn't have to go play UCLA, which is usually a pretty good, has been a pretty good team under Chip Kelly and can come out and surprise you and knock you in the teeth a little bit if you're Washington. For if you're Utah, there are no days off on this, right? Like Washington gets Michigan State in non-conference. Michigan State's not very good, right? Comparatively. Florida's, even in the struggles, is still a pretty good football team. They just happen to play in the SEC East, where you're going to take an L against Tennessee. You're going to take an L against Georgia. And their annual crossover game has been LSU, and LSU was pretty good last season. So, Florida's a team that's going to have a really good roster. They're pretty well coached under Napier. That's a tough one. Baylor, again, you like the coaching staff. it is a tough job, but you like the coaching staff. They're going to show up. They're going to play, likely play pretty well. Utah's got, kudos to Whittingham for taking this on, this kind of schedule on, this season. The Utah, if they can make it through this schedule and get to 9 wins in the regular season, I think that's a tremendous. I mean, I know that fans, we tend to look at record. Record can be a little bit of an illusion. I think if you're a Utah fan, if you can get to 9 wins against this schedule, that's really good. I mean, this is a really, really hard football schedule that they've got set out in front of them. And a lot of those games, the Utes are favored, but it's not, by 10 or more points. And that is also to say, scoring is going to be down a little bit this season as well because of some rule changes. We expect there to be about 1 less possession per team. Some of those spreads that I had out there are the naive spreads are based off of scoring from prior seasons, which are, it's going to be a little lower than that, if you will. So it's going to be pretty tight, for the Utes to get through some of these. But if you're a Utah fan, this should be, maybe it'll be a nail biter. But you'll get to see some, almost any given week, the Utes are going to be in a fun, good game and a good matchup against a pretty good team. That's really exciting. If the Utes were to come through this season and end up Pac-12 champs, that would probably be, Whittingham's best coaching job, even with all they have returning on both sides of the ball. All right. We've done it. We've covered it. Who's next? Clemson. All right. And Clemson just made an interesting coordinator hire on offense, which they needed to do. All right. I'm Rob Bowron, the econometrician behind Beta Rank. You can find all the stats you just saw and a whole lot more at sharpcollegefootball.com. You can find me at Beta Rank FB or at Sharp College Football. I will try to respond in a reasonable time frame. You can also find, we have a Pac-12 podcast, which we actually do have on the schedule for next Monday. We're going to record again. And you can find all the back episodes of that at sharpcollegefootball.com/12pack radio. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you again when we preview the Clemson Tigers.